No, lo sono pigliato io, non lo fa questo. E questo qua piglio due. Poi c'è il canale 2 che...
Allora facciamo la dieta con... quando... 20 punti. Esatto. No, quello è garbage time.
Sì, è vero. Chiami time out per... Ah sì?
Beh, ma se eravamo tutti fuori a confidenza. Chiediamo. La facciamo a noi.
Sì, poi chiedo a Lena se ci fa una foto. Vai.
Devo usare io se volete farci.
No, ma il suo lascio perdere.
Allora è quello più performante. Ragazzi, Cristina, vai più sulla sedia. Sono venuti casi, no?
Pensavo seduti.
Ci sono piedi.
Grazie. Ti dico anche il coso su LinkedIn. It's been a pleasure.
Quando scrive? Bella infine. Io sono più seduta rispetto a voi. No. Ne vediamo rifare con la stessa. Sei anche davvero una verticale. Ci prendi la... non so se... Poco, quello che riesci. Grazie. Io ma ci sento un po' frontale, ma sono un po' da verticale.
Segretaria social.
Andiamo a vedere.
Grazie.
Foto.
Che facciamo? Lavoriamo anche oppure...
Volete vi faccio vedere il mio artefatto?
Le presentazioni stanno a zero. Allora, immagino di dover fare qualcosa qui, no? Secondo voi dove le trovo le presentazioni? Ah, no, non già caricate in realtà. Facciamo, partiamo. Questo. Sì, no, ma uso il pointer in realtà, preferibilmente. C'è, vero, il miglior paper della conferenza. Borghesi. Ma insegna qualcosa a Sergio.
Ma lì perché volevo avere...
Allora, partirei comunque sia perché sennò poi dopo facciamo... Me la passi? Che dà? Ok. Okay. Welcome. Thank you for being here at this new session. This is a special session organized by MEDAERE. I'll tell you in a second what MEDAERE is. And it's entitled Sustainability and Resources in the Mediterranean. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting us to be here. Thank you, Nathalie, and to Federico and Andre. So, first of all, who is MEDAERE? What is MEDAERE? MEDAERE, it's an acronym that stands for Mediterranean Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, which is a newly born association. As you will see, it was born 2 years ago, basically, aiming to unite researchers that are working on environmental and natural resources in the Mediterranean area, no matter where they come from. It builds on the long tradition of cooperation at the regional level among environmental and resource economists, particularly within the European Association, EAIRI, but also as a tradition of cooperation in other continents. There is the American Association, African, Asian, Latin America Association. There are sister associations of the European ones. But there was no intercontinental association, so to speak. And given the nature of the Mediterranean, that is at the crossroad between Europe, Asia, and Africa, we thought that a dedicated association, dedicated to the Mediterranean, was particularly important. And this way, actually, the idea started long ago. I launched it in 2019 when I was president of the Italy Association at the European Annual Conference. And after COVID, basically, we started operations. And this map shows where we have been so far. So I call this slide the ladies a tramp because we have been traveling a lot from Italy to Portugal for the Spanish-Portuguese Association, to France, but also, you see, to Baku for the COP29 or Bergen for the EAIRI conference last year. And this is in the spirit, I would say, of the association, the idea of going around, reaching out to the different groups or colleagues working around the Mediterranean or on the Mediterranean. The objectives of the association are, as I said, uniting, so creating a network of environmental resource economists who are working on the Mediterranean region, contribute to the progress of regional sustainable development and environmental issues in the Mediterranean, but also organizing trainings, research collaborations, and knowledge exchange among scholars from different disciplines. So I stress the interdisciplinary component of the association, particularly favoring or focusing on young scholars, especially those in countries where there is no association. And so helping them to reach out to the others, scholars who are working on similar topics around Europe and beyond. And finally, possibly writing and maybe winning one day joint proposals to propose also policy and research solutions for the Mediterranean. Here is a non-complete, non-exhaustive list of topics we want to focus on, from the transitioning away from fossil fuels and renewable energies to natural disasters and climate-related migrations. And unfortunately, I would say all these topics are very relevant for the Mediterranean. And the reason is that the Mediterranean is a highly vulnerable region, as you all know, a real hotspot at the global level, with features that go beyond average problems. As the diagram on the right shows, the Mediterranean is warming faster than the average, 20% faster than the global average. And due to climate change, many countries in the Mediterranean area are already well beyond the critical threshold that you can see in the diagram to the right, where the water scarcity is represented in red for those countries that are far beyond the critical threshold, in yellow for those that are beyond, and the rest is green. But also the rest like Algeria, is very close already to the critical threshold. And the problem is due to increase, is expected to increase by 45% or up to 45% according to recent estimates by the end of the century. Also because the population is expected to double by 2070. So water scarcity is one of the main problems that we will have to face. But obviously, as I said, not the only one. Obviously, we need to face these problems with proper policies. And so we need both mitigation and adaptation policies to reduce the climate problems that we already suffer. And this is also the topic that I want to broadly address in my presentation. So what are Mediterranean countries doing? What should they be doing? How much mitigation policies have been implemented in the Mediterranean? For instance, carbon pricing, renewables, energy efficiency. How much countries have devoted or are devoting to adaptation policies? And how are these policies perceived by public opinion? In presenting this, I will somehow refer to a different interpretation of adaptation beyond the traditional one, as you will see, not only adaptation to climate change, but also to climate policies. And I will stress the existence of asymmetries among the shores of the Mediterranean, and this will lead to non-exhaustive, again, policy and research agenda for the future, and also for the future of MEDAERE, of the association itself. So very briefly, starting from the current policies, I want to give you a broad overview of the state of the policies in different Mediterranean countries and compare them, starting from renewables. What you see here is a representation of the renewable electricity generation in the Mediterranean, measured by the share of electricity generation from renewable sources as percentage of the total. In green, you have the regions where the share is beyond 50% or between 30 and 50%, depending on the green shade, let's say. In yellow, when it's between 15 and 35, and orange and red below this percentage. And also at first sight, you immediately see a sort of dichotomy with the green part being in the northern side of the Mediterranean, or the eastern side for Greece and Turkey, and yellow scatter here and there, Morocco, Jordan, and France. Actually, France is only, so to speak, 23%, but we are talking about here renewables only. So without nuclear power. Obviously, if you add nuclear power for France, the percentage gets much, much higher. The northern part of Africa, so the southern part of the Mediterranean, as you see, is clearly orange or red, so below 5% in the case of Libya. But it's also interesting to look at the trend between 2015 and 2025. If you look at the arrows, you will notice that there are two arrows. So a rapid increase above 10% percentage points in Spain, Greece, and Turkey, which are already at the top of the percentages. Whereas those at the bottom, like Libya or Lebanon, basically are stagnant with no increase in percentages, suggesting that the distance between the most advanced countries and the least advanced countries is due to increase in the years to come. If we look at energy efficiency, the second pillar, I would say, of the policies, well, it looks pretty similar, even at first sight. Again, the green part in the northern shore of the Mediterranean, yellow and orange in the eastern and northern part for Algeria, Tunisia, and red the rest. Here, energy efficiency is measured as in terms of energy intensity, so kilos of oil equivalent divided by GDP. Here is GDP at 2020 level. And so the lower the number, the better the performance. And as you see in the northern shore of the Mediterranean, the average value is 87 kilos per GDP. In the eastern part, 122, and in the southern Mediterranean, 145. So there is a clear distance among the three shores. And the trend is fortunately negative everywhere, because negative means that we are improving energy efficiency, but at different levels. In the northern part, the improvement has been much faster, with a decrease in energy intensity of 18%, as compared to the other two. In the southern part, it's just 3%. And these are numbers for the last decade, basically, 2015, 2024. The third pillar, at least in the European policies, we are used to think in terms of third pillar of the climate policy, is represented by carbon pricing. And carbon pricing is somehow unique for the members of the so-called EU ETS, the European Emission Trading System. So that is why we have no numbers here, because there is a unique number in terms of price of the European Union allowances, which is around 70 euros per ton of CO2 for the members of the EU ETS. So from Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, to Greece and Cyprus. What about the others? Turkey and Morocco here are represented in orange because they are building their own carbon pricing, so their own carbon market right now. Whereas there are no signs, I would say, of carbon pricing policies in the rest of Africa, Algeria, Libya, Egypt. Israel has a carbon tax, but it is with a limited coverage. The price of the ETS has been fluctuating. As you know, here I wrote 70 as an average level in 2024. As of yesterday, it was 77, but it has been fluctuating pretty much in the last few years because also of the geopolitical tensions. But what matters here is that even the countries that have no carbon pricing might be affected by the European carbon pricing decisions. And actually, they might be affected because they don't have carbon pricing. I'm referring here to the so-called CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that Europe has decided to go for in order to create a level playing field. Most of you will probably know about it, a decision that has been very controversial, but at the end has become operational since January 1, 2026. What is the expected effect of CBAM on the others, in particular for us, on the Mediterranean countries? Well, the image from the World Bank gives you an idea. It represents the CBAM Trade Exposure Index, which is computed as the product of carbon intensity times exports to the EU. Basically, how much a country is expected to pay for due to CBAM. Again, different colors, just to give you a simple image, first sight intuition of the impact. And as you see at first sight, few countries are very red, so suffering a lot from CBAM, in particular India and, sorry, where it is? India, Egypt. Interesting enough, Ukraine is one of those countries, but also Turkey is expected to suffer. Why? Because these countries are exporting to Europe exactly in the sectors that have been that are subject to CBAM, from fertilizers to electricity to steel, hydrogen, and so on and so forth. So we can say that the effect of CBAM is expected to be not very high, but some countries will be more exposed. And Some of these countries are exactly the Mediterranean countries. So this becomes particularly interesting and important for our own research and policy interest. So far, I focus mainly on the mitigation side, the policies that can help mitigate climate change. But we know that climate change is unfortunately here to stay, and we have to adapt to it. So what are Mediterranean countries doing, or how much are they doing for the adaptation purpose? Today, I decided to go for visualization. Forgive me, I like maps. And when I have limited time, I think it's the most efficient way of conveying a message. And here again, a map with simple color. Again, at first sight, you see the difference among the shores. Green for the northern Mediterranean, orange or red for the southern part, and orange or yellow in the eastern side of the Mediterranean. What are these colors about? As you see, they represent the adaptation cost by 2050 as measured in terms of percentage of GDP per year. So the green part is when the expected cost is low, between 0 or 0.5% of GDP, and then the increasing numbers are represented with increasing intense colors up to red. So Spain, France, Italy are green with an expected cost below 0.5%, but the poorer side of the Mediterranean, so Libya or Egypt, are expecting to suffer between 2 and 3% per year, which is, I think, a quite remarkable number in terms of costs of adaptation. Again, the simple message that emerges is that the gap might increase between the shores because of these costs that are heterogeneous. This is a comparison of the mitigation and the adaptation policies in place. But how are these policies perceived? To answer this question, I want to show you a result that comes from a Horizon project that we ran with other partners called CAPABLE, which stands for Climate Policy Acceptability, that reports the opinion of the public opinion of the citizens in different countries on different European measures. So the first column, the one to the right, yes, I always get confused when I'm from, the one over there reports the different policies at the European level, so parts of the European Green Deal, let's say. Then you have all the countries where the survey was conducted. And to give a simple idea, in green, you have the countries or the cells for the countries where the majority of the population supports the policy, so 50% or more. In reddish or intense red, the countries where the majority opposes the policy, so below 50% supporting. So at first sight, you see it looks pretty red, doesn't it? So there is a lot of opposition to some of the European policies. If you read it horizontally, you will notice that some policies are opposed everywhere. For instance, fossil car sales, it is the one, it's hard to, here it is, okay. This is totally red. No one likes it. Fossil car sales ban. Also the EU ETS, unfortunately, it's red everywhere. The general support is very, very low. Some other policies like, here you can hardly read it, but the last one is funding railways. Everybody supports it. But read it vertically now. Look at the countries that are more green, so they support more policies. To my surprise, the countries that are more green are France, Greece, Italy, and Spain. So all Mediterranean countries are more prone to support the European, let's say, climate policies in general. And again, let me say this was surprising because I expected somehow the contrary, poorer country to be more against it. How comes? Well, one possible explanation, at least the one I think may fit better, is that Mediterranean countries are suffering already more than other countries from climate issues. And so they are more aware, let's say, of the problem, forced to look at the problem. Another element is that, okay, they are more geographically exposed to the problem. For instance, we have more coastal areas, more kilometers on the coast, and so the rising sea level, it causes more problems, more troubles than other countries. So higher damages as a consequence, but also possibly countries that are less rich, with less financial resources. And so probably they may perceive a European policy as an opportunity to get resources to face climate change, rather than going for our own national policies that can be expensive, getting help somehow from Europe. Also getting help from the financial resources that these policies generate at the European and at the national level. For instance, the EU ETS generates important revenues that can be redistributed and obviously are already actually redistributed, although it's not much known, but this goes more into the southern part of Europe, so the Mediterranean countries, than, or Eastern Europe than to northern countries. This suggests, in a way, a new dimension of adaptation in a broader term, not adaptation to climate change, strictly speaking, but adaptation to the climate policies. There is a sort of a process, a dynamic process that seems to emerge from these results, suggesting that countries are adjusting to the environmental problems, but also to the policies that come with the environmental problems. You may also say that these countries are adapting to the environmental, European environmental policy because it's something that is top down. So they have to adapt to something that is decided at the central level. But in any case, it's surprising to see that they are adapting, adjusting quite rapidly and supporting these policies. What would be interested, in my view, in the future, so it's also a research line, in my opinion, that it's important to follow in the future, is what about the non-European countries? Because the countries I show you, France, Spain, Greece, Italy, are European countries that are subject to a European policy. But in the Mediterranean, we have non-European countries that are somehow subject to the European policy. And the CBAM example is exactly about that. So I think it would be important to look at their reaction, whether they are capable of adapting to the European mitigation policies. For instance, setting up a carbon market, a carbon pricing to avoid the CBAM. And this is what I think should be studied in the future. Somehow these considerations, very broad, I apologize about this, but it's an introductory analysis, define and settle a policy and the research agenda for the future and also for MEDAERE, in my view. First of all, on the policy side, they call for MED institutions because we have common environmental problems, but very fragmented answer to these problems, as we could see from the various maps and the different percentages. Secondly, they call for a more cooperative north-south action. And finally, in my view, they call for a better pricing, a better way of measuring things, better pricing of carbon emissions, but also better measuring of adaptation costs, both direct and indirect, and also the geopolitical risks when we built up green projects. And to respond to this policy needs, I think we have to face a research agenda. First of all, I think we need more data. This is the basis of good empirical work. And when looking into these problems, I noticed the lack of data and very different way of collecting data, which make things hardly comparable across countries. So for instance, I think we need more homogeneous economic and environmental data, data on infrastructures, on the absorption capacity of different countries. I may dig deeper into this if you want, but also data on actual versus perceived adaptation costs. So the kind of analysis that we perform in the Horizon project I was showing before should definitely be needed for the other non-European MED countries. The call for cooperation in the Mediterranean calls for cross-border, the analysis of the impact of cross-border investments and the distributional north-south effects of our policies, and the need to get a better pricing of carbon adaptation costs, of risks, calls for, in my view at least, better, more extended and linked carbon markets. So my idea is that carbon pricing has been working pretty well so far where it has been implemented, so it should be extended, but keeping an eye on the distributional aspects for its acceptability. And so this implies studying and also addressing the problems that CBAM may generate and study the effects of CBAM on non-European Mediterranean countries. And when we talk about adaptation costs, I think it would be important to have an intra-Mediterranean financial support to help those countries who have no financial resources or no sufficient financial resources start proper adaptation policies right now, let's say, already. And finally, models that can integrate geopolitical and climate aspects would be badly needed to have a better understanding of the future. I conclude by saying that we are certainly navigating troubled times, troubled waters, and this applies in particular to the Mediterranean, where we have worse energy security problems, trade problems, food security, migration, and so on and so forth. The Mediterranean is somehow part of the problem because it's a hotspot, it has a relatively low adaptation capacity in some countries, and it has huge financial constraints, particularly in some parts of the Mediterranean. But it can also be part of the solution because we are super rich of renewables, because we could contribute to the blue carbon economy, as it's called, because it can be a logistic hub for the future, and also because of its role, geophysical role in terms of energy grids. I think, or at least this is my inspiration, I think that MEDAERE can contribute to find solutions for all these problems, to set the policy and the research agenda in the future. And this is the reason why I warmly encourage you to look at our webpage. It's brand new. We launched it this week, and you can find it at this link, or you can scan it. And also invite you to join us. On the webpage, you have a Join Us link. Just need name, surname, and email, and it's free, which is a very appealing aspect for economists, I think, and so that we can share our newsletter, our activities with you, and keep you in the loop for the future. Thank you for your attention. I pass on. Yes, sorry, I did ask if there were questions. Yes, please.
Very surprised about, can you go back
Yes.
to
Where
this one? The other one, that one. I'm very surprised about the color of Italy.
Me too.
And especially comparing Italy to Denmark.
I was, in fact, I was
So
saying,
may you tell us more about this data? Because you tell that they are coming from a survey
Yes.
that has been conducted in all these countries. So maybe that result could be due to sample selection of the respondents, because I'm extremely surprised.
yeah, I was surprised too. As I said, it came to my surprise. I am quite confident that it was not a sample bias problem, to be honest. Having seen the composition, let's say, of the sample, as I said, this is a European project. So it was conducted by each partner in each of these countries, because the consortium was quite broad. I think we were around 10 or 12 partners in this horizon that just finished last year. We had the consultancy also of a survey company, and I can just say that it seems to be properly done, but I have the feeling that we underestimated the Italian reaction, or overestimated the negative attitude of the Italians towards the environmental policies. I was also surprised by the Scandinavian answer, because we had this idea that Scandinavian countries are ahead of us, rightly so. But talking about that with also my Danish colleagues, just to dig deeper into the data, there seems to be a kind of reaction now. Maybe it's cyclical, as attitudes may be, but also because they started much earlier. So now they perceive much more the cost of doing something more. So the marginal cost, let's say, of improving their environmental policies is getting higher, and also the perception is getting more negative. In our case, the marginal cost might be lower because we have done little so far, and the marginal benefit might be very high. Just an additional number in terms of this. I'm conducting a study with some colleagues on the Italian case, and in particular on the adaptation cost. And we noticed that the benefits of investing €1 in adaptation range between 4 and 7 euros. So if we do these policies, the returns might be extremely high. Compare them to the numbers also that I was showing, adaptation costs ranging between 0.3 and 0.5% of GDP per year, but with benefits that can be 4 or up to 7 times higher. I think that probably this has not been communicated enough so far, but that people who suffer from environmental problems in Italy right now, more and more frequently, think of floods, for instance, are really thinking of the benefits of going greener than before. But having said that, I can only present the aggregate results, and I can only say that I was very, very surprised, as you are. Yes, please.
I think. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
I was surprised about the CBAM exposure slide here. But then I realized that these are the results related to iron and steel, and just iron and steel. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, I took them for iron and steel because in this platform you can choose the specific sector you're interested in.
Because I think I have just a comment, it's not a question. I think it could be very, very interesting to see what is the exposure and potential impact in other sectors such as fertilizers for the Mediterranean region, with North Africa highly involved in this kind of trade, and aluminium for many other African countries connected with the trade routes through the Mediterranean area. So I think this is something really interesting to go deeper and deeper.
Yeah, good point, and good suggestion for the future. I will try to show more sectors. But there is a reason why I chose iron and steel, because if you look at the portion of the cake, let's say, of the CBAM fees across the sectors, iron and steel is about 2/3. So it's really the dominant sector in terms of impact. For fertilizers, I can already tell you that, for instance, if I'm not wrong, Algeria is expected to suffer a lot because Spain imports a lot of fertilizers from Algeria. So the diagram, the map will look different, but not too different, because Algeria is already here appearing as a critical country in this sense. But good point. I will try to show more sectors. Thanks.
Yes, just I'd like to share just an exchange that I had with Carlo Carraro. And he was mentioning that Europe is is about to implement the CBAM as well, and that this action is not going to be very well received by the African countries because of what you just mentioned, and that there was a proposal to send to give back this money to Africa. Say the money collected from the CBAM, and but it looks like Europe really doesn't want to get into that. And part of the problem is really a coordination problem, both for development policies and environmental policies that, in a sense, should be coordinated. So there is an opportunity to cooperate, say, development economists and environmental economists, in a sense, may work together. And the point, if I can share these, that was, I think was interesting, is that, well, say Europe doesn't have a coordinated development policy, and Europe doesn't have a development economist association like the environmental economists do. And then he said, oh, yes, it should be very important that they also development economists have a European level association. And CITES is leading actually this process. I would like to share. But he said, well, it was like that also when I founded the European Association of Environmental Economics. And then we realized that we were able to do advocacy because at the national level, they had no impact. But at the European level, Europe was recognizing the European Association that you led, of course, as an interlocutor. So this is an interesting experience that could be good also for development economists.
Absolutely. I would very much encourage this kind of exercise. It's more than exercise. My personal experience as president of the European Association was very positive, also for the policy outreach. And here I have to say I'm in debt to Carlo because he was the one with coming with this idea. And I'm very grateful also because he asked me to be the Secretary General of the Policy Outreach Committee, which I'm still am. So I encourage the development ones to go that way. On the other part, on the first part of your intervention, let me say that I totally agree. And actually, I'm one of the proponents of using the CBAM revenues for the countries that are more hit by CBAM, and African countries are one of those. I was coming here with Alessio, I was talking about an interview this week by the Wall Street Journal that asked me what we could do for Ukraine. And my answer was, use the CBAM revenues, because Ukraine is one of the countries that is likely to be more hit by CBAM. This would give, as I said, a powerful signal, not only to Ukraine, but also to the rest of the countries. What kind of signal? The signal that CBAM is a non-protectionist measure. We don't do it to protect ourselves, but rather to push the others to go for similar environmental policies. If we help them with the CBAM revenues, I think the signal is really powerful. I have discussed this, to be honest, with the Commission. The Commission is not particularly favorable. And they say, probably they are right, but they say CBAM revenues are little money, so they're not going to make a difference. And they might be right on this. But as an economist, I'm convinced about the power of signals. And we have prominent economists who taught us the meaning of giving proper signals. And so in this sense, I think it wouldn't make a total difference, but it would certainly convince the other that this is not a selfish policy, so to speak.
Yeah. If I can, that's why it's so important that the development and the environmental economists act together, because the Africans say respond to the idea food first, then ethics. So and that's quite normal. So let's why don't we try to couple the transfer of CBAM revenues with other development actions, like the Piano Mattei, for example. In our case, the Piano Mattei may become a European plan rather than an Italian one.
Yeah.
So that could be an example.
Let's join forces for that. I'm supposed to be a chair, so I'm not supposed time out.
Okay, yeah. I just have to add on this discussion as well, the cooperation also among the two fields, as I think one point was missing, if I can, and maybe could be interesting in all this debate, is the role of voluntary carbon markets, which have, and ideally for now, they have no boundaries. So there are no, geopolitical limits. And maybe that could be the part in which maybe the south of Europe can interact with the north of Africa, for instance, to create, let's say, a voluntary market for Mediterranean countries.
In the last MEDAERE session, the one we had in Trento, if I remember correctly, I talk about that. This time there was no time, but I think that the voluntary carbon markets can be a powerful tool for the southern part of the Mediterranean to enter the game and get revenues. Because there will be, we know, some sectors that won't be able to decarbonize by 2050. So they will have to buy allowances. I don't like that, but let's be realistic. And we need countries or areas that are able to absorb CO2 and sell this capacity. And the south of the Mediterranean is super rich in this. And I mentioned blue carbon because I think that the absorption capacity of the coastal areas can be very important in this direction. So this can be, in my view, a way to create financial resources, financial flows from the north to the south, which are not simply, aids that many times didn't work, but are conditional aids, conditional on them investing in something that can be useful for us as well. So I think that this is a promising area. At the same time, voluntary carbon markets, as they are now, forget it. I mean, the price is ridiculous, and they're totally unregulated because you may say, okay, they are voluntary, but I think we need to regulate voluntary carbon markets. We need to find a minimum standards to make these things work. And the Article 6 of Paris Agreement creates or produces the framework in which this can happen. So I'm a bit more optimistic that this will happen in the years to come. But it's a long way, and it's not a silver bullet. But we don't have silver bullets anyway, so let's use this bullet as well. Okay, a good chair should say, you are late, so you should stop. And I thank you for your attention and move on to Christina.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, let me thank you for being here, and let me thank you for having me here. Today I'm going to present a work that moves from policy analysis. So we will see together what does it mean to have a UEFA Nexus governance framework. And then we will see again together an example of climate adaptation investment. So we are dealing with the Spanish agriculture. So it will be precisely an example of what has been done in Spain and what is planned to be done in the next years in order to adapt to the climate, to the effect of the climate change. So the very starting point of this presentation is exactly what does the WEF Nexus mean. So I'm pretty sure that all of you has heard about this concept at least once in your life, but it's very important to have a look at it in the context of this presentation. The WEF Nexus is a concept that has been originated during the Davos Forum in 2008, and then it has been properly formulated in 2011 during the Nexus conference. It is a concept that moves from a very basic consideration, which is the fact that all the resources, all the natural resources are strongly interconnected one with the other. So if we are dealing with water, at the same time we are dealing with food, and if we are dealing with food, at the same time we are dealing with energy. And of course, even the reverse is true. Even if this seems somehow really obvious, because think, for example, about a drought. It starts as an hydrological problem, but then it immediately begins also to be an agricultural problem, an energy problem, so everything is pretty and super interconnected. So as I was saying, even if it seems really obvious, it is important to have in mind that in the past, the legislations, the policies, and the government didn't take these resources into account in an interconnected way. We have many examples of policies that were adopted only for one specific sector, for example, for the water, without looking at the whole system of all the other resources. At the very core of this concept, we need to take in mind a specific question, which is how can society manage and allocate resources in a precise way that could be fair, equitable, and sustainable in order to use them in the best way ever? So, what should society do in order to manage them properly? At this regard, we need also to take into consideration that when we are dealing with adaptation strategies and adaptation measures, the concept of WEFE and the question that I was posing before starts to be even more complex because, of course, adaptation interventions are not neutral with regard to the nexus. So an action that is thought to improve the agricultural productivity may inadvertently impact also on the level of the water. So it is important always to have in mind this kind of interconnection. So this is why the literature suggests to us that the best way to govern properly these resources is to try to do more and better with less. So the idea is we do not need to reduce at all our productivity, but we need to manage it in another way. The second important aspect of dealing with adaptation strategies in a proper way is about having an integrated approach. So it is really important that at the legislative level, at the governmental level, the different actors, the different authorities that are involved in the system interact one with the other. cooperate together in order to have proper decisions that do not impact, for example, on a local level without having the possibility to interact properly with the authorities that stay, for instance, at the national level. So it became evident that we need to ask ourselves what are the key aspects that a legislative framework should have in order to better manage these resources. First of all, we need strong institutions. So this is something really evident. This is something that find application for all the resources with which we have to deal. But these institutions, as I was saying before, should be coordinated and also cooperate in a proper way. In order to make you better understand this slide, I would like to give you an example because the results that I'm going to present are part of an European project which has to do with several Mediterranean countries. And among them, there was, for example, Egypt. Egypt is a country that, once analyzed from the point of view of the legislation, it immediately appears evident that even if for certain aspects there were strong institutions, these institutions do not act one with the other. So there were strong institutions acting per se. So a decision taken, for instance, at the national level was not able to be discussed at the local level. It was just imposed, and so there was no coordination and no cooperation. Even if this would be, I would say, the ideal model of the governance, we need, of course, to take in mind that nowadays there are a lot of obstacles to implement this kind of model. First of all, as I was saying, by providing the Egypt example, sometimes decisions are still made at a sectoral base by several independent bodies. Secondly, there is a general lack of willingness to cooperate between the different actors and between the different policymakers. And lastly, I would say that there are some actors that are missing in the decision-making process. So in order to avoid and to overcome these obstacles, it would be important to have integration, trust across the different actors, and the most important, also stakeholder involvement. Only in this way we would be able to have a system that, at least in theory, could function in a proper way in order to better manage the resources that are interconnected. So having provided this example, having provided this introduction, now we can move to the concrete case study of this presentation. This presentation is about the Spanish governance. In particular, in these slides, I'm going to present some of the policies that have been adopted within the Spanish normative framework. And then, as I was anticipating at the beginning, we will see a concrete example of application of an adaptation intervention within the Spanish agriculture. So Spain has been defined according to this project as a policy laboratory within the Mediterranean area. And in my opinion, the case of Spain is really interesting because it shows us what I was saying a moment ago, which is the fact that resources are still managed, not in an integrated way, but you will see in a moment that Spain is doing a lot of progress on this point. So if you see here, we have the National Water Law that has been adopted in the 1985 and then amended several times. And then we have the Irrigation Modernization Plan, which has been adopted again at the early 2000. These two examples are important because they show us precisely what I was saying before. Policies adopted only for a specific area, only for a specific resource, without taking into consideration the whole system. Fortunately, the Spanish government has also understood that the climate pressure and the effect of the climate change do not respect the sectoral boundaries. So it is important also to have in mind the system as a whole. This is why during the last years, very recently, I would say, because we are speaking about 2021 in this case, the situation has started progressively to change. So we have, for instance, the National Energy and Climate Plan adopted in 2021, the Climate Change and Energy Transition Law again in 2021, and then we have the Rural Development adopted for the period 2023-2027. These last three policies that I have mentioned are a big demonstration of what the Spanish government is doing, which is try to integrate the resources one with the other. So, for instance, if we look at the energy transition, it is important to have in mind that the goal, of course, of being a country that relies only on renewable energies, renewable resources, is now connected also with the need to grant water security. And we know that water security is defined according to the United Nations as the situation in which all the people have access to enough quantity of quality water. So it's not enough to have water. We need also to be able to manage it in a proper way in order to grant to all the people the access in a fair and sustainable way. So this general national framework allows us also to see what does it happen at the local level. And in particular, a framework that at the national level takes into consideration the several different resources is also a framework that allows strategic interventions at the local level. And in particular, when I'm mentioning in this case local level, I'm referring to the Duero River Basin, which is a basin located in the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula, and is a basin that is suffering a lot from the consequences of the climate change. Note that in Spain, 11 basins out of 15 are suffering from water scarcity. So the situation is very dramatic. And this situation drives, from one hand, from the climate change effects, so increased temperatures, unpredicted precipitation, rising water demands. But at the same time, they also drives from a poor management of the water that has occurred for a long time period, because you have seen that the irrigation modernization plan has been adopted in 2002 for the period 2008. So it has been adopted really in the past. So still, of course, there are nowadays other laws and other policies, but the situation has worsened with the passing of the time. So in this project, what we have done, we have looked at what is happening in the Duero River Basin, and especially we have looked at it from the perspective of agricultural productivity, because given that we are dealing with the WEF nexus, as I told you at the beginning, one of the most important elements of this nexus is the food aspect, which is of course interconnected and related with many other resources. So in order to understand what was happening in the Duero River Basin, it was important to have a look at the one that here I defined as the modernization journey, because in this basin there is a lot of agricultural production. And of course, with the passing of the years, the local stakeholders, the local authorities have understood the need to modernize the system. So the very early interventions have started in the 1987, but then we have also other examples in 2001, 2022. If we look at this, you will see that, for instance, some of the measures, as the one of 2001, came from a national level. So at a certain point, the national level has decided that there was the need to move from an open channel for the irrigation system to a closed pressurized system. So it was important that the local basins fulfill and follow this kind of rule. But then, if you look at the intervention in 2022, it moves from the Duero Basin Management Plan. So it was something really local, something really adapted to the context in which we were dealing. So given these modernization tasks, while we were dealing with the local stakeholders during this project, it seems to us very evident that it was missing something. So, working with the local stakeholders, we proposed the installation of a 90 kilowatt photovoltaic system in order to power the irrigation pumps, which at that moment were not powered with renewable energy sources. So in 2024, the local stakeholders tried to work on this project with us, and the project proposal was again to install this photovoltaic system really close to the municipality in order to be better used also for the irrigation purposes. Here you can see also some of the costs that are estimated to be done. For example, the general cost of the photovoltaic system, which we assumed will be fully financed, and then also operation and maintenance expenses, which of course should be taken into consideration for every year after the installation. The second element that, in our opinion, was missing in this picture was the installation of soil sensors, because the basin is suffering from water scarcity. So let's try to irrigate better. Let's try to understand what is the level of water in the soil in order to, again, better irrigate. And after the installation of these soil sensors, it was possible to shift also the crops production. These actions taken into consideration together compose what we can define as climate smart agriculture, which is an innovative system. Climate smart agriculture has been defined by the FAO, and it is a way of doing agriculture in a sustainable way. So we do not need to reduce our productivity. We need to do it better. As I was saying at the beginning, do more and better with less. And this is precisely the concept that has to do with the agricultural aspects. So the second action is the installation of soil sensors, 96 precisely. And as I was mentioning, these sensors allow to precisely irrigate better. And this, of course, would reduce the water used, but also the fertilizers. After the installation of these sensors, of which you can see the total cost in the slide, it was possible also to change the crops that were there. So after the installation of the sensors, we go through a crop diversification by introducing higher value and rest resilient crops, such as carrots, onions, and poppy, which at the beginning, without the installation of the sensors, were not possible to have. So what we have done with all these actions, so we have started with the business as usual scenario, which is the one that I have presented in the 3 first steps of the journey. And then we have tried to think about what is happening, what would happen if we had action 1 and action 2 that is composed by 2 different elements. So we have performed the cost-benefit analysis following the European Commission guidelines, meaning that we have done financial and economic analysis. In this slide, you can see some of the parameters that we have adopted for the analysis. I'm not going to enter into the detail of them, but for instance, again, following what the European Commission suggests, we have decided to take as a time horizon 25 years, as a financial discount rate 6%, but then we have done also some sensitivity analysis. So let's go directly to the results. And what seems here evident is that, first of all, we are dealing with 2 actions that has to do with the WEF nexus, because the first one, solar installation, photovoltaic installation plans, has to do with the energy, so the second letter of the WEF nexus. And then the second action, we have sensors for water and change of crop for food. So in our analysis, we have tried to understand what could be the effect, the combined effect on the WEF nexus. So what would happen in this basin if the actions are done, and what would be the effect of this action on the general system of the resources. So in this table, you can see both the cost for both the action as well as both the benefits. Keep in mind that cost-benefit analysis is a methodological tool that allows us not only to take into consideration the economic aspects. So, of course, we are able to understand if the benefits are higher than the cost or the reverse from a very economic point of view. But cost-benefit analysis allows us also to take a look at the environmental effects as well as at the social effects. So it is a tool that is really useful because it can give us a big panoramic of what is happening. So you can see that the outcome of this analysis supports the economic feasibility of the two different actions, showing in the benefit cost ratio that for €1 invested in the actions, we are able to get 2.92 of positive social and environmental spillovers. So to conclude, what are the lessons learned from this project and from this presentation in general? First of all, I would say that climate adaptation measures requires cross-sectional and integrated governance approaches because, as you have seen with the example of Egypt, even if we have strong institutions, if these institutions are not working one with the other, the results would be very poor in the terms of management of the resources. Secondly, the Nexus approach is able to identify and ask also the identification of different synergies across the interconnected system. The Spanish case in particular has shown us, first of all, the fact that climate pressure is gonna lead the government to move from their static and not integrated framework in order to have in the following year, hopefully, an integrated system that take into consideration several resources without missing other points. And then lastly, an important aspect is the fact that the coordinated measure can, of course, generate, as I was saying, positive spillovers in different areas, and that the adaptation strategies should be understood, of course, not only as a cost, but also as an investment, given that, as we were saying in the previous presentation, adaptation is required. We are not anymore able to mitigate the effect of the climate change. So we need to adapt properly to it. And so even if it seems to be, and it is really costly for some actions, this would be an investment for a long-time resilience. So thank you so much for your attention. And if you have questions or comments, they are more than welcome.
I open up the floor to questions, if any.
May I ask one? Thanks, very, very interesting. And one clarification, what is the nature of the benefits? Are those benefits environmental and social, or are all those benefits also, let's say, financial? Because, I mean, when you measure the social feasibility, then you have to take into account also the financial feasibility of the project. And my guess is that that project is socially desirable, but not financially viable, right? Is this correct?
No, I would not say that it's totally correct. I mean, it's financially valuable too, because the costs are lower than the benefits. So it seems that it is worth doing these actions, even because they allow us to reduce the water consumption, to reduce the fertilizer users. So somehow the effects, first of all, are immediate, because if you install the sensors, then the irrigation procedure would require less water. So in this case is something efficient. And for example, from the environmental impact, we have seen the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. So it was important, especially for action 1, which is the one of the photovoltaic system, by adopting, of course, a renewable energy sources, you will reduce heavily the greenhouse gas emissions. So it was, I would say, a win-win situation, both from the point of view of the economic feasibility as well as the social and environmental feasibility.
Can I ask you the return time for these investments if you have computed
25 years.
25?
Yes.
Quite
Yeah, long time.
well, super interesting. There's a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then thanks again. And
you.
move to Alessio D'Amato now. I'm out.
Okay. So thanks for staying here so late. I know it's been a long day, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here, and also the speakers and Simone for this wonderful idea of organizing sessions and of the MEDAERE, which also involves me as, I wouldn't say the founders, but the working committee, let's say. I will talk about digitalization and climate change. So I will start talking about climate change by adding some ideas of how climate change is going on, especially in driving the needs for adaptation. And then I will try to say something about why heterogeneity also matters when we talk about digitalization as an instrument for adaptation to climate change, especially in relation to the Mediterranean agriculture. So, broadly speaking, I don't need to say much about why climate change is something that is driving a lot of different impacts that go from environmental impacts related to rising temperatures and heat waves, water scarcity and droughts, sea level rise and wildfires. We are all aware of all these environmental impacts, and these environmental impacts, as we all know, translate into significant socioeconomic impacts related to health impacts, mortality, extreme events, extreme rainfalls, floods, landslides, etc. So I don't need to go much into this eco-terrorism, call it this way. So these are the two eco-terroristic slides. But what we can observe is, and this is the first point where I mention the word heterogeneity, is that these environmental and socioeconomic impacts are taking place in a highly differentiated way across the Mediterranean. So in this slide, what we can see is that there is an average change. I cannot point, maybe. Yes, there is an average change in the temperature of the Mediterranean, but the average change is larger in the southern part of the Mediterranean than in the northern part. And the temperature change in the southern part of the Mediterranean implies that, as we will see shortly, the impact of climate change and the need for adaptation is stronger. And this is important because this, as we will see, this is linked with the bigger difficulties in addressing digitalization needs in the southern part of the Mediterranean. And if you look at the same report as in the previous slide, the 2020 MEDEC report, we also see that the consequences of climate change in terms of temperature increases and of precipitation trends are not only bigger in the southern part of the Mediterranean, but are also faster in the southern part of the Mediterranean, which means that it started worse, and it's getting worse in a quicker way. And okay, this is the sea level trends a similar reasoning, but this is based on an outdated, too pessimistic scenario nowadays for climate change. How does this translate into climate vulnerability? We can see this from this recent paper by Lazoglu and others, where basically they elaborate a composite index of climate vulnerability. This index, and in this map, this index is represented in relative terms, which is showing that the indicators of climate vulnerability are not only worsening more in the south, but are also worsening more in a differentiated way in one part of the Mediterranean relative to the other. So it's not just that climate is worse in the southern part of the Mediterranean. Matters are much more complex, and heterogeneity is much more point-wise all over the Mediterranean area. I will skip the attribution part because it's way too complex for this short presentation. If we look at if we focus on agricultural production, we see that climate change is going to impact in a significant way several different kinds of agricultural production. So we go from cereals and rice to olives to vegetables to fruit trees and to grapevines. And what we see is that even if we keep us there is a big literature that is trying to understand what the consequences on agricultural production of climate change will be in the near future, and this literature has been summarized in a very smart way by the IPCC. And what we see is that even if we keep up with the objectives that are included in the Paris Agreement, there are already significant impacts, negative impacts on agricultural productivity in several possible kinds of agricultural productions that are relevant for the Mediterranean. So this is true. The impact on agricultural production is true in an objective way, because this is what is observed in the scenarios that are built up in the relevant literature, but it's also true if we look at how the farmers perceive the relevance of climate change. So the farmer perceive a worsening of the impacts of climate change in terms, for example, of water management, and in terms of the role of climate change in increasing over time from today to 2030, the relevance of climate change in strongly decreasing agricultural production. And this is worrying in the Mediterranean, because as we can see, there are countries all over the Mediterranean that feature a significant or non-negligible share of agricultural production over GDP. And in this graph, we only have the direct impact of GDP, agricultural production on GDP. Okay, so this is why the numbers look smaller than we would expect. If we look at the numbers including the whole agri-food system, then the numbers are much more significant. And anyway, one point is how relevant agriculture can be in the Mediterranean in terms of GDP. And the second point is how heterogeneous the impact is, which is another difficulty. The interests of a European country can be asymmetric also because the role of the different phases of the value chain is asymmetric across Mediterranean countries, and these add to the other sources of heterogeneity that were already highlighted by Simone before. Now, if we agree that we are in trouble and we need adaptation, agricultural adaptation to what is going on in terms of climate change, then there is also an increasing attention to the role that can be played by digitalization broadly intended. And there is an increasing literature that is trying to understand how digitalization can help. And this is something that we are doing ourselves. We means Manuela Coromaldi, Lena Uzelak, and me in a companion paper which is work in progress, where basically we are trying to put ourselves in a still, in my perception, under-investigated issue, which is how can digitalization be considered an adaptation strategy, and how does this affect the outcomes in terms of, for example, crop income? Most of the literature is based on small local case studies, and basically this is one of the points that I would like to raise at the end of the presentation, because this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to extend our analysis to a wider setting, a national setting, using data from Nigeria. But this is not the point of my presentation. My presentation is how can digitalization help, and why is this help still underdeveloped, in my perception, in the Mediterranean area? So in general, digitalization can do a lot for climate change. There is a wide consensus on this, and also, for example, if you look at the one of the digital guides from the United Nations Development Program, you can find all the several different ways in which digitalization can help in terms of mitigation and adaptation. But when we look at digitalization and agriculture, the kinds of help that can come can be made clearer and more precise. This information is taken from a recent JRC report on the state of digitalization in the European Union with respect to agriculture. So we go from technologies that can help trading as well as forecasting of weather conditions, to apps that can facilitate banking and finding resources to fund investment, or to find the most recent data on commodity prices, up to measuring technologies. As in the previous presentations, digitalization may help if we need to measure issues that are specific of single crops, that can help, as in the previous case study, in improving our data availability. Okay, and this extends to crops and also to livestock. And in this report, unfortunately, in this recent JRC report, only the EU countries are covered, which means that all the northern part of Africa is, for example, all the other parts of the Mediterranean are not covered. But this is anyway something that is telling us useful information on the increasing broadband coverage in terms for rural households, and also what rural households are doing with the different possible apps and technologies that can be used. So basically, this is taken from this JRC report, where they report several answers to questions related to how are you using digital platforms, and how are you using digital, the availability of digital technologies to improve your agricultural activities. And so we go here from the use of apps that help farming and increase productivity, to online training to communicate through instant messaging, for example, with other farmers, and so on and so forth. And another issue that is interesting, although this is only for Europe, but of course, as you can see, there are several Mediterranean countries that are included as part of Europe. There is a lot of heterogeneity also in terms of adoption and in terms of the shares of non-adopter. So the share of non-adopting farmers is quite heterogeneous across the European Union, and as we will see, this can be partly justified by the access, and this is even more important if we look at the whole Mediterranean area. The point is that one of the main hurdles for the adoption of digital technologies by farmers in the European Union, and I would expect this to be even more important in the context of the Mediterranean overall, is that the non-adoption is correlated with the perceived cost. So the larger is the perceived cost, the lower is the adoption incentive, as we could expect. Now, the point is the need for digitalization is something that seems to be, at least looking at this evidence, true at the overall Mediterranean area. But as Simone was saying in the previous presentation, it's very important to recognize that Mediterranean countries feature high heterogeneity under a huge number of respects. So it's not only a matter of how climate change is affecting the Mediterranean economies between the northern part and the southern part. So we expect this northern part to be more exposed to extreme precipitations, for example, while the southern part is expected to be more exposed to droughts, extreme droughts event. But also there are the differentiated impacts also match with the differentiated ability to cope with these events due to a lot of different socioeconomic characteristics related, for example, to the fact that the southern part of the Mediterranean is made of mostly smallholder farmers, which are instead less present in the northern part of the Mediterranean, and also due to the differentiated, let's say, features and quality of institutions. And also to the fact that there is also a significant differentiated impact between coastal areas, and 1/3 of the population on the Mediterranean lives in coastal areas as compared to inland areas. And this means that this boils down to showing us that it's not only a matter of needing adaptation measures, including digitalization, but also taking stock of the fact that there are some parts that are weaker and less capable of adapting to climate change. So this is taken from, this is the only part that is taken from our joint paper, which is basically one of the reasons why we expect digitalization to be a powerful tool for adaptation. Because the point here is that if farmers are risk averse, then they are likely to react more to past experiences past negative experiences in terms of climate shocks. And if they have better access to digital tools, we see this as one of the adaptation tools that farmers in the Mediterranean can have to face climate shocks and to reduce the impact that the exposure to larger post-traumatic shocks and therefore to the perception of larger current uncertainty in terms of the impact on agricultural production and therefore of crop income. So this is the one of the reasons why we expect digital tools to act as an adaptation device through risk reduction. Now, if this was not clear yet, the problem now is that also digitalization has a lot of issues to be solved over the Mediterranean and in general all over the world. One, for the Mediterranean, one point that is important is the digital divide. The digital divide in the Mediterranean has at least two dimensions. One is a rural-urban digital divide. So there is, for example, this De Klerk and others paper that estimates the impact of broadband, high-speed broadband coverage on economic growth in European Union member state. So, I mean, there is no evidence for the Mediterranean itself, but at least there is evidence for European Union member state where there is clear evidence that is telling us that broadband access has a larger impact on economic growth for European Union, for rural areas in the European Union, which means that rural areas are going to benefit the most out of an increase and improvement in broadband access as compared to urban areas. And if we look more specifically at the Mediterranean, there is this 2021 paper by Perez Castro and others, where we see in the different parts of the Mediterranean area a comparison between the evolution of an ICT development index over time in Mediterranean area, and we see again a lot of heterogeneity and differentiated improvements in the northern part of the Mediterranean and the southern part of the Mediterranean. So if you look at countries like Algeria or Morocco, for example, you see that the starting point is lower and that the improvement is slower. And this is important because what they find in their paper is that there is a clear positive correlation, for example, between the ICT development index and the human development index in 2015. So clearly there are benefits from a larger access to digitalization, which here I'm simply measuring as broadband and internet access. And there is clear evidence for, although there is not yet, as far as I could see, evidence specifically focused on Mediterranean countries, we see that there are a lot of different reports and papers that are suggesting that the access to digital to ICT is beneficial for agriculture, for agricultural adaptation. This is important because this literature, as I was mentioning at the beginning, is mostly based on specific local case studies, which is not negative in itself, but it's providing evidence which is case specific, which means that one point that is very important to me is that we need to enrich our understanding with broader evidence. And this is one point that I leave for future research. So if we look at all the possible benefits, we see that the adaptation measures are clearly beneficial for developing countries. I'm out of time. 1 minute. I have exactly 1 minute of slides left. So there is a lot of evidence, I will not go, that is telling us that there are significant benefits of from the access to digitalization in developing countries, and these kind of benefits are particularly relevant at the local level for smallholder farmers. For example, in this Koruma and others paper 2024 that is dedicated to a survey of the literature for smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. The final closing issue is that there is a lot of heterogeneity also in terms of access. And this is important because if you look, for example, at this Capasso and Canitano edited book, you find, for example, this Digital Economy and Society Index that is telling us that, something about the readiness of different countries over the Mediterranean in terms of ability to access this kind of digital technologies. And also, I found this graph, which must be taken with a lot of care because it's produced from data from cable.co.uk, which is commercial sellers of access to internet. But what was amazing is that the differences in internet speed between Southern Europe countries and Northern African countries, which is, really huge, which means that we have a lot of heterogeneity in terms of Mediterranean countries. We know anyway that there is need for adaptation to climate change due to the huge impact that climate change can have into the Mediterranean area. But the problem is that the digitalization can be of help if we want to focus on the digitalization as a tool to face the need for adaptation in Mediterranean countries. But there are still issues that are to be solved and that are under investigated in the literature that mostly have to do with the digital divide that I mentioned, urban-rural or north-south, and digital literacy and infrastructure access. Having said this, I'm sorry for having to be so quick, maybe too much stuff into too little time, but I thank you for your attention. I'm open to questions, and I also invite you kindly and warmly to join our new association for the Mediterranean Environmental and Resource Economists. Thank you.
Thank you for this colorful conclusion. And I
For the presentation.
no presentation now. I open up to questions, maybe one or two, if there's one over there.
It's not a question, it's for like support to your presentation in a sense that I agree with you with everything you said. And since you didn't have time, I would like to stress also the importance of digital literacy. So yes, you stressed a lot on infrastructure, like digital infrastructure as a starting point to being able to exploit digital technologies in order to use it as a climate adaptation strategy, but without enough and sufficient digital literacy, that it can be hard to really being able to fully exploit its potential at its maximum. So spoiler, tomorrow presentation will be related about it. I do not know much about the Mediterranean case. But for example, to measure digital literacy, it can be taken like for your project, you can look at the DigiComp framework used by the European Union. They have their own digital literacy index. And what we did was adapting one of the survey methodology within the agricultural sector in order to measure digital literacy across skills, knowledge, and attitudes. So it's something that can be measured in order to get data and evaluate also that aspect. So
thanks. What can I say? Thank you. And tomorrow, I'm confident I will be able to be there. Just to mention that I didn't focus on literacy. Digital literacy is one of the determinants of the spreading of digital tools as adaptation tools in the case studies that are analyzed in the literature. So thank you.
I think there is one more question here.
Yeah, I will be very brief, just to.
You're stealing your own time.
That's fine. Maybe if you. I would.
Sorry, there.
The flow diagram with the what you expect from digitalization as an outcome in behavior between crop diversification and the adoption of digital tools.
You mean the last one?
Yeah,
this one, yeah.
This one.
Okay. So the idea here is that if farmers are risk averse, then an increase in uncertainty implies that they react by reducing production. And so if they don't want to reduce production, roughly speaking, I mean, if they, if you add the digitalization tools that help the spreading of information concerning the current status of weather, or that can help farmers to share information, and they can act as a risk reduction device. Sure. And this means that the output can increase, and the risk borne by the amount of risk borne by farmers can decrease, and this is welfare improving. This is the rough idea.
Yeah, and I am perfectly in line with you. I agree with these kind of expectations, but I was thinking my personal experience working in rural development projects in Lebanon and Jordan, in rural areas, and facing this kind of situation, the reaction of traditional smallholder farmers is exactly the opposite, in the sense that once they perceived a high risk and they are risk adverse, they do not trust anything else. And this is exactly where digital literacy matters most.
Okay.
Because if you try to build some trust between farmers and with some tools, for example, digital tools, you can try to achieve what you are describing here. But I mean, at least in my experience with these kind of farmers, with the small scale production system in the Middle East, is exactly the main problem you have to face.
Yeah. I agree, but we are trying to develop an empirical analysis on this, but the point is that I would expect, if this is right, and I have no doubts that this is, we are focused on Nigeria, which is a different setting, but anyway, we can kind of interact digital literacy with the availability of digital tools to see if where there is additional digital literacy, the impact is stronger, or from negative it becomes positive. So I will take notes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's a very good idea.
Thank you. I think we have to close, because otherwise the last speaker is left.
Let's get dinner.
Yes. Next question at dinner.
Quando mancano 5, dimmi tu cosa vuoi.
Okay. So we started a bit later, so we can go a few minutes beyond.
Abbassiamo qua. Okay. Okay. So I thank all my colleagues here on the panel because they provide